Some objects in history are just objects, but every now and then one becomes truly infamous. Today we're talking about one of the most dangerous things ever made, a small sphere of plutonium that would earn the absolutely chilling nickname, the Demon Core. Just look at this. What you're seeing is a recreation of a terrifyingly real moment. A simple, ordinary flathead screwdriver is the only thing standing between a room full of scientists and a lethal blast of radiation. And no, this isn't a movie set. This was a top-secret lab, and this incredibly risky balancing act, well, it was about to go horribly wrong. So what was at the center of all this drama? This thing right here, a sphere of plutonium-gallium alloy, weighing about 14 pounds and no bigger than a softball. I mean, it almost looks harmless, doesn't it? But packed inside was the potential for an absolutely unimaginable release of energy. Now, before it got that terrifying name, its codename was just Rufus. It was built during the Manhattan Project, and it was meant to be the heart of the third atomic bomb, the one scheduled to be dropped on Japan just days after Nagasaki. But, as it turns out, history had other plans. Japan surrendered on August 15th, 1945, which meant that Third Strike never happened. And so, all of a sudden, this fully primed weapon of war had no target. Instead of being deployed, it stayed right there at the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico, where it became an incredibly valuable and ultimately a fatal tool for research. And that's where the story takes its first tragic turn. The war was over, the scientists at Los Alamos were heroes, and maybe there was a sense of invincibility in the air. Just 6 days after Japan's surrender, this core was about to claim its first victim. Meet physicist Harry Daghlian. Here he is conducting a very delicate experiment, working all by himself late one night. He was stacking these tungsten carbide bricks around the core. Now, those bricks acted like mirrors for neutrons, bouncing them back into the plutonium and pushing it closer and closer to a chain reaction. It was a very hands-on approach that, back then, felt almost routine. Okay, so to really get what happened next, you need to understand this one key idea, criticality. The simplest way to think about it is as a nuclear tipping point. See, normally, neutrons escape from the core, and any reaction just fizzles out. But if you reflect enough of those escaping neutrons back into the core, it hits a point where the reaction can sustain itself. That's criticality. It's the line he was trying to get close to, but absolutely not cross. So Daghlian was stacking that very last brick when his instrument suddenly screamed a warning. It was too much. As he quickly pulled his hand away, the heavy brick slipped, and it fell directly onto the assembly. For just a split second, the core went supercritical. There was a bright blue flash and a wave of intense heat. He instinctively knocked the brick away, but it was too late. The damage was done. In that instant, he had absorbed a massive, fatal dose of radiation. He fought for his life for 25 agonizing days before he died from acute radiation poisoning. The core had drawn its first blood. Now, you would hope, that this tragedy would have been the end of all hands-on experiments, right? But this was an era of supreme confidence. These scientists had just helped win a world war. So, 9 months later, another group of physicists would tempt fate with the exact same plutonium core. They even had a nickname for what they were doing, a phrase that came from the brilliant Richard Feynman. They called it tickling the dragon's tail. They knew exactly how dangerous this was. They knew they were playing with fire, poking a monster that, if it woke up, would be deadly. The lead scientist this time was a man named Louis Slotin. He was a gifted physicist, no doubt, but he was also known for having a bit of a flair for the dramatic, a bit of bravado. He'd even developed his own signature, unapproved technique for these experiments, forgetting safety shims and relying on nothing more than his own steady hand and, yes, a flathead screwdriver. So on the left, you see the clean technical diagram of the setup, but on the right, that's the tense reality. Slotin would hold the top hemisphere with his left thumb through a hole and then use his right hand to wedge that screwdriver in there to maintain a tiny gap, preventing the two halves from fully closing. On May 21st, 1946, while he was actually demonstrating this risky technique to 7 other people in the room, it happened. The screwdriver slipped. The beryllium hemisphere dropped, the gap closed, and for the second time, the core went supercritical. And just like before, a brilliant blue flash and a wave of heat washed over everyone in the room. Slotin's reflexes were lightning fast, and he stopped the reaction. But in that split second, the damage was irreversible. The physics experiment was over. The human tragedy was just beginning.
His reaction was pure instinct. He ripped the top hemisphere off with his bare hands, breaking the reaction. It was an incredibly brave act that almost certainly saved the lives of everyone else in that room, because his own body absorbed the brunt of that neutron blast. But in doing so, he had just signed his own death warrant.
This table really puts his sacrifice into stark perspective. Slocum received an estimated dose of over 1,000 rem. Now, to give you some context, a dose of about 500 rem is typically fatal for most people. He got more than double that. The next closest person, Alvin Graves, received a very high dose, but it was survivable, largely because Slocum's body was physically in the way.
What came next for Louis Slotin was a horrifying 9-day ordeal. His body just systematically broke down as the radiation destroyed it from the inside out. His colleague Harry Daghlian had taken 25 days to die. For Slotin, with that much higher dose, the end came in just 9.
After 2 fatal accidents in less than a single year, the scientific community just couldn't ignore the dangers any longer. This whole dark chapter was about to lead to a lasting and necessary legacy of change.
It was right after this second death that the Corps, originally just called Rufus, got its permanent, infamous name. It wasn't just a piece of lab equipment anymore. Now, it was the Demon Corps.
And the most important legacy to come out of all this, a complete overhaul of safety procedures. The era of tickling the dragon's tail by hand was officially over. Hands-on criticality experiments were banned, and they were replaced by remote control systems that let scientists do these tests from a quarter-mile away, watching safely on cameras.
So whatever happened to the Corps itself? Well, for a little while it was scheduled for another nuclear test, but that got canceled. Then, in the summer of 1946, the Demon Corps was melted down. Its plutonium was recycled and mixed into other weapons cores. Its singular, deadly identity just dissolved forever. You know, in the end, the story of the Demon Corps is a true tragedy, but it's also a pivotal cautionary tale. The deaths of these 2 brilliant physicists were a terrible, terrible price to pay. But the lessons learned from their sacrifice completely reshaped nuclear safety and have, without a doubt, saved countless lives in the decades since. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? As we keep pushing the boundaries of what we know, of what's possible, what other dragons are we learning to tickle out there? And more importantly, have we learned enough from the past to do it safely this time?